The Last Wish. Reba McEntire reads a heartbreaking letter that changed everything. The fluorescent lights in room 214 hummed their eternal song of sterility, casting harsh shadows across the pale green walls of Tulsa General Hospital. Logan Mitchell pressed his small face against the cool window glass, watching raindrops race each other down the surface while his mother slept fitfully in the narrow hospital bed behind him. At 9 years old, he had learned to count time differently than other children his age. Not in hours or days, but in the spaces between his mother's labored breaths, in the moments when her eyes would flutter open and find his face, offering him that brave smile that had carried them both through so much. Sarah Mitchell had been fighting for 3 months now, though Logan knew the real fight had been going on much longer. Even before the word cancer had entered their vocabulary, even before the endless parade of doctors with their clipboards and grave expressions, his mother had been a warrior. She had fought to keep their tiny rental house in Broken Arrow when the utilities threatened to be shut off. She had fought to put food on their table during the months when the hospital cut back her nursing shifts. She had fought to give him birthday parties with dollar store decorations and homemade cake when other kids had elaborate celebrations at Chuck E. Cheese. But this fight was different. Logan could see it in the way her hands shook when she tried to brush his hair before school, in the way she fell asleep mid-sentence while reading him bedtime stories, in the way she sometimes looked at him like she was trying to memorize his face. The doctors used words like aggressive and metastasized and palliative care, but Logan translated them all the same way. His mother was losing. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the window with increasing intensity. Logan pulled his worn backpack closer and unzipped the front pocket, carefully extracting a piece of notebook paper covered in his careful 9-year-old handwriting. The blue ink from his favorite pen had smeared slightly where his tears had fallen the night before, as he wrote by the light of his phone's flashlight, not wanting to wake his mother in the bed next to him. "Dear Reba," the letter began, and Logan's lips moved silently as he read his own words for the 100th time. "My name is Logan Mitchell, and I am 9 years old. My mom is in the hospital and she is very sick. The doctors say she might not get better. My mom loves you so much. She plays your songs every day and knows all the words. When I was little and had nightmares, she would sing 'You're Gonna Be' to make me feel safe again. When she cries sometimes at night, she plays 'The Greatest Man I Never Knew' really quiet so she thinks I can't hear." His small fingers traced the words carefully. Writing had never been his strongest subject in school, but every letter in this message had been deliberate, every word chosen with the seriousness of someone far older than his years. "She told me once that your music saved her life when she was pregnant with me and scared. She said you made her feel like she could be strong enough to be my mom all by herself." Behind him, Sarah stirred slightly, and Logan quickly folded the letter and tucked it back into his backpack. He turned to see her eyes flutter open, searching for him with that moment of panic that came each time she woke up, disoriented by the medication. "Hey, baby," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the oxygen tube that had become a permanent fixture. "How long was I asleep?" "Just a little while, Mom," Logan lied, moving to the chair beside her bed. The truth was she had been unconscious for nearly 6 hours, and the nurses had been in twice to check her vital signs with increasingly worried expressions. Sarah's eyes found the window where the rain continued its relentless assault. "Sounds like a real storm out there," she said, attempting to sit up slightly before the effort proved too much. Logan was quick to adjust her pillows, a task he had become expert at over the past weeks. "Do you want me to play some music?" he asked, reaching for the small Bluetooth speaker they had brought from home. It was one of their few possessions that still worked perfectly, a Christmas gift from 2 years ago that had become more precious than gold. Sarah's face lit up with genuine joy for the first time in days. "You know what I'd love to hear?" Logan was already scrolling through her phone, knowing exactly which song she would request. As the opening notes of Fancy filled the small hospital room, Sarah closed her eyes and mouthed along with every word. This was their routine, their small rebellion against the clinical coldness of this place. For 3 minutes and 47 seconds, they weren't a dying woman and her soon-to-be orphaned son. They were just Sarah and Logan, singing along to their favorite songs like they had done thousands of times in their little kitchen while making breakfast, or in the car during long drives to doctor appointments, or late at night when the weight of their situation felt too heavy to bear alone. If you're watching from somewhere warm and safe tonight, I hope this story touches your heart the way it touched mine. Please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what this story means to you. Your connection to these tales of hope and human resilience is what keeps us going, and I'd love to hear your thoughts as we continue this incredible journey together. As Reba's powerful voice filled the room, Logan made a decision. Tomorrow, during lunch break at school, he would walk the 6 blocks to the post office. He had been saving his allowance money for weeks now, the few dollars his mother gave him when she could, and he had exactly enough for a stamp. Maybe 2 stamps, just to be sure. He would address the envelope the way his teacher had shown them in their letter-writing lesson, with careful block letters and his best penmanship. He had looked up Reba McEntire's address on the school computer, finding only a general mailing address for her record label in Nashville, Tennessee. That seemed like a good enough place to start. Adults were always talking about how mail could get anywhere in the world, how the postal service was reliable and efficient. Surely they could get one letter from Oklahoma to Tennessee. Surely someone would understand how important this was. "Logan?" Sarah's voice pulled him from his planning. "Come sit with me." He climbed carefully onto the narrow bed, mindful of the IV tubes and monitoring wires. Sarah wrapped her thin arms around him, and he could feel how much weight she had lost, how fragile she had become, but her embrace still felt like home, still carried that particular scent of vanilla lotion and hospital soap that had become comfort to him. "I need to tell you something important," she said, and Logan felt his stomach drop. These conversations had been happening more frequently, and they never brought good news. "Doctor, Peterson thinks it might be time for us to talk about what happens next." "I don't want to talk about that," Logan said quickly, pressing his face into her shoulder. "You're going to get better. The new medicine they're trying will work." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her fingers gently combing through his hair. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and the rain continued its steady percussion against the window. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful and measured. "Sometimes, baby, the most loving thing we can do is prepare for different possibilities. I want you to know that no matter what happens, you're going to be okay. Aunt Jennifer loves you so much, and she's going to take good care of you. But I want you to take care of me," Logan whispered, and he hated how young and small his voice sounded. "I know. I want that too, more than anything in this whole world." Sarah tilted his face up so he could see her eyes. "But loving someone means wanting them to be happy and safe, even when we can't be there to make sure of it ourselves." Logan nodded, because he knew it was what she needed to see, but inside his mind was already racing ahead to tomorrow, to the post office, to the letter that would somehow impossibly reach Reba McEntire. Adults were always talking about miracles, about the power of hope and faith. If there was even the smallest chance that his letter could bring his mother one moment of pure joy, one glimpse of the woman whose voice had been the soundtrack to their entire life together, then he had to try. The storm outside was intensifying, rattling the windows and causing the lights to flicker momentarily. In the brief darkness, Logan closed his eyes and made the kind of wish that only desperate children make, the kind that feels too big for the world, but too important not to voice, even silently. He wished for magic, for miracles, for the impossible to become possible. What Logan didn't know was that sometimes in the space between hope and heartbreak, the universe conspires in ways that defy all logic and reason. Sometimes a letter written in blue ink on notebook paper can travel distances far greater than the miles between Oklahoma and Tennessee, and sometimes, when a child's love is pure enough and desperate enough, it can reach across the vast divide between ordinary people and superstars, touching hearts that have heard thousands of stories but have never heard one quite like this. The next morning brought no relief from the storm that had battered Tulsa through the night. Logan walked the familiar hallways of Roosevelt Elementary with his backpack clutched tightly against his chest, the letter inside feeling heavier than any textbook he had ever carried. His teacher, Mrs. Henderson, noticed his distracted state during math class, the way his eyes kept drifting to the clock on the wall, counting down the minutes until lunch break. "Logan, can you tell us what 7 times 8 equals?" Mrs. Henderson asked gently. Logan's cheeks flushed red as he realized he had no idea what problem they were working on. 56, he answered automatically, a multiplication fact he had memorized months ago, though he couldn't focus enough to know if it was the right answer to the right question. At 11:45, the lunch bell rang like a salvation call. While his classmates headed to the cafeteria with their brown bags and lunch trays, Logan slipped out the side door of the school, his heart pounding with the fear of being caught, and the desperate hope of what he was about to attempt. The post office was 6 blocks away, a distance that had never seemed so vast. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle, but Logan's worn sneakers were soaked through by the time he reached the corner of 5th and Main Street. Mrs. Patricia Williams, the postal worker who had been manning the front desk for 23 years, looked up from her sorting as the small boy approached her window, water dripping from his jacket onto the linoleum floor. "Well, hello there, sweetie," she said, adjusting her reading glasses. "Shouldn't you be in school right about now?" Logan's rehearsed explanation tumbled out in a rush. "It's lunch break, and I have permission to mail something really important. My mum is in the hospital and I wrote a letter, and I need to make sure it gets where it's going." Patricia's expression softened immediately. She had seen enough desperate faces across her counter over the years to recognize genuine need. "Let me see what you've got there, honey." Logan carefully placed the envelope on the counter. His best handwriting spelled out Reba McEntire in large block letters, followed by Nashville, Tennessee, and nothing else. No street address, no zip code, no record label information despite his research attempts. Patricia picked up the envelope and studied it, with the kind of gentle patience that comes from understanding that some things matter more than postal regulations. "Sweetie, I'm afraid this address isn't quite complete enough for our mail system," she began, but something in Logan's face made her pause. The boy's lower lip was trembling, and his eyes held the kind of desperation that belongs to someone far older than 9 years old. "Please," Logan whispered, placing 2 crumpled dollar bills and a handful of quarters on the counter. "My mom loves Reba McEntire more than anything. She's really sick and the doctors say she might die soon. I just want to try to make her happy one more time." Patricia Williams had processed thousands of pieces of mail in her career. She had seen love letters that crossed oceans, business deals worth millions of dollars, and government documents that changed people's lives forever. But she had never seen anything that moved her quite like the desperate hope of a 9-year-old boy standing in her post office, with water dripping from his clothes, and $2 clutched in his small fist. "You know what, honey," she said, reaching under her counter for her personal address book. "I happen to know someone who works in Nashville. Let me see if I can help make sure this gets to where it needs to go." What Patricia didn't tell Logan was that her cousin worked as a security guard at the Country Music Hall of Fame, and that she had connections throughout the Nashville music scene that most postal workers in small Oklahoma towns could never dream of. She also didn't mention that she would be making several phone calls during her lunch break, calling in favors from people who owed her kindness from years past. Meanwhile, 600 miles away in Nashville, Tennessee, the machine of country music commerce was grinding through another ordinary Tuesday morning. Marcus Henderson, Reba McEntire's manager for the past 15 years, sat in his downtown office reviewing contracts, scheduling meetings, and fielding the endless stream of requests that came with managing one of country music's biggest stars. His desk was covered with the usual array of opportunities and obligations: a potential movie role, 3 television appearance requests, endorsement deals worth millions, charity events, and fan mail. So much fan mail. Every day brought hundreds of letters from fans around the world, most processed by his assistant and answered with form letters and signed photographs. It was an efficient system that had worked for years. Marcus prided himself on protecting Reba's time and energy, filtering out distractions so she could focus on what mattered most: her music, her performances, and her business empire. He had built his reputation on being the guy who said no to the right things, who knew when to shield his client from requests that would drain her emotionally without offering significant professional benefit. The morning was progressing normally until his assistant Jenny knocked on his door with an expression he didn't recognize. "Marcus, I just got a call from someone at a post office in Oklahoma. It's about a letter for Reba, and the postal worker says it's urgent." Marcus barely looked up from the contract he was reviewing. "We get urgent letters every day, Jenny. Send the standard package with the signed photo and the form letter." "This one is different," Jenny insisted, stepping into his office uninvited, which was unusual for her. "The postal worker said it's from a 9-year-old boy whose mother is dying. She personally guaranteed that this letter would reach Reba, and she's asking us to please make sure it gets to her directly." "Jenny, we can't possibly respond personally to every sad story we receive. If we did, Reba would never have time for anything else." Marcus set down his pen with the kind of exaggerated patience that indicated his growing annoyance. "Send the package, But Jenny remained standing in his doorway, holding a piece of notebook paper that had arrived by overnight express mail, paid for by a postal worker in Oklahoma who had used her own money to ensure a child's desperate hope would travel faster than regular mail could carry it. "At least read it," she said quietly. "Please." Marcus sighed and extended his hand, expecting to skim through another heartbreaking but ultimately routine request. Fan mail often contained stories of illness, hardship, and desperation. He had learned to develop a professional distance from these stories, understanding that emotional involvement in every fan's personal tragedy would make his job impossible. But as his eyes moved across Logan's careful handwriting, something shifted in his chest. Maybe it was the way the boy had described his mother's love for Reba's music in such specific detail. Maybe it was the honesty in admitting he didn't know if the letter would even reach its destination. Maybe it was the way he had ended the letter, not with a request for autographs or merchandise, but simply asking if Reba might consider singing just one song for his dying mother. "She doesn't want anything," Marcus murmured, reading the letter for the second time. "He's not asking for money or tickets or anything for himself. He just wants his mom to hear Reba sing." Jenny nodded silently, recognizing the change in her boss's demeanor. Marcus looked at his calendar, mentally calculating the impossibilities. Reba was in Los Angeles recording her new album, with studio time booked solid for the next 2 weeks. After that, she had the Madison Square Garden show, followed by 3 more major venues across the East Coast. The logistics alone would be a nightmare, and the precedent it would set could be problematic for future requests. But as he read Logan's letter for the 3rd time, Marcus found himself remembering why he had gotten into the music business in the first place. Before the contracts and negotiations, before the careful management of time and resources, there had been the simple belief that music could change lives, that it could offer comfort in the darkest moments, and hope when hope seemed impossible. His phone was ringing, demanding attention for another urgent matter, but Marcus ignored it. Instead, he reached for his direct line to Reba McEntire, knowing that what he was about to do would either be the most meaningful decision of his career or one that would create complications he couldn't yet imagine. The call found Reba in Studio B at Capitol Records, taking a break between recording sessions for her upcoming album. At 68, she had learned to pace herself during long studio days, stepping outside for fresh air and quiet moments that kept her voice strong and her mind clear. When her phone buzzed with Marcus's direct number, she answered immediately, knowing he only used that line for truly important matters. "Hey Marcus, please tell me you're not calling to add another interview to tomorrow's schedule." "Reba, I need you to sit down for a minute. I just received something that I think you need to hear about." Something in his tone made her lean against the brick wall of the studio building, giving him her full attention. In 15 years of working together, Marcus had never sounded quite like this. Vulnerable, uncertain, but also strangely hopeful. "There's a boy in Oklahoma named Logan Mitchell. He's 9 years old, and his mother is dying of cancer. He wrote you a letter." Reba closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight that came with these stories. Over the decades, she had received thousands of letters from fans facing unimaginable hardships, each one a testament to music's power to provide comfort during life's darkest moments. She tried to respond personally when she could, but the sheer volume made it impossible to reach everyone who needed her. "Marcus, you know how much these stories affect me, but with the album deadline and the Madison Square Garden show—" "Let me read it to you," he interrupted, which was unlike him. Marcus never interrupted her, never pushed when she set boundaries about her time and emotional energy. As Marcus read Logan's letter aloud, his voice catching slightly on the boy's description of his mother singing Reba's songs during her worst moments, Reba felt something shift inside her chest. She had heard thousands of fan stories over the years, but there was something about Logan's simple, honest words that cut through her professional defenses like a blade through silk. "He says his mom told him that "You're gonna be" saved her life when she was pregnant and scared," Marcus continued. "That she plays your music when she cries at night, thinking he can't hear." Reba's hand went involuntarily to her throat, where her wedding ring hung on a thin gold chain, a private reminder of her own losses, her own moments when music had been the only thing standing between her and despair. She thought of her son Shelby, grown now and pursuing his own dreams, and tried to imagine what it would feel like to know their time together was measured in days rather than years. "Where are they?" she asked quietly. "Tulsa General Hospital. The postal worker who made sure this letter reached us said the boy's been staying there with his mother. She's a nurse, was a nurse, single mother who worked double shifts to support them both. The detail about Sarah being a nurse hit Reba unexpectedly hard. She thought of all the nurses who had cared for her own family members over the years, the quiet heroes who worked long hours for modest pay, dedicating their lives to healing others. The idea that one of these angels was now lying in a hospital bed, facing her final days, while her 9-year-old son tried desperately to bring her one moment of joy, felt like a personal call to action. "What does your calendar look like?" she asked, and Marcus could hear the decision forming in her voice before she had even fully made it. "Reba, you know I have to tell you this is complicated. You're supposed to be back in the studio tomorrow morning to finish the vocals for Strong Enough. The Madison Square Garden show is in 4 days, and we still have rehearsals scheduled. The label executives are expecting the new single by Friday." Marcus, her voice carried the quiet authority that had made her one of the most respected figures in country music. "What does your calendar look like?" Marcus stared at his computer screen, mentally calculating the impossibilities. Canceling studio time would cost thousands of dollars. Rearranging rehearsals would affect dozens of musicians and crew members. The record label would not be pleased with delays on an already tight deadline. But he had worked with Reba long enough to recognize the tone in her voice, the one that meant her mind was already made up regardless of the obstacles. "If we left tomorrow morning, you could be in Oklahoma by afternoon, but we'd have to push back the studio session, which means push it back. The rehearsal on Thursday would have to be moved to..." "Move it. Reba, the label is going to want explanations, and when they hear it's for one fan, they're not going to understand. They'll think you're setting a precedent that could become unmanageable." Reba was quiet for a long moment, listening to the sounds of Los Angeles traffic in the distance. Inside the studio, she could hear her backup singers warming up for the next session, their voices blending in harmonies that would soon become part of her new album. All of it felt suddenly less important than a 9-year-old boy sitting in a hospital room in Oklahoma, watching his mother slip away while hoping against hope that a miracle might still be possible. "Marcus, let me tell you something I've never told you before," she said, her voice soft but steady. 3 years ago, when my cousin Danny was dying, I was on tour in Europe. I kept thinking I'd see him when I got back, that there would be time for one more conversation. He died while I was performing in London, and I never got to say goodbye. Marcus had worked with her through that difficult period, but she had never shared the depth of her regret about missing those final moments. Ever since then, I've promised myself that when it really matters, when someone needs me and I have the power to be there, I won't let logistics and schedules stand in the way. This little boy's mother is dying, Marcus. She spent her whole life taking care of other people, and now her son is trying to take care of her in the only way he knows how. If there's any chance that my being there could bring her some comfort, some peace, then that's where I need to be. What do I tell the studio? Tell them the truth. Tell them that sometimes being an artist means remembering why we started making music in the first place. After ending the call, Reba sat in the California sunshine, thinking about the strange paths that connected human lives. Tomorrow, instead of recording vocals in a state-of-the-art studio, she would be driving through Oklahoma, carrying nothing but her voice and her guitar to a hospital room where a dying woman would hear her sing. The thought both terrified and exhilarated her. She had performed for presidents and packed stadiums, won every award country music had to offer, and built a career that spanned 5 decades. But somehow, the most important performance of her life would be for an audience of 2 in a small hospital room, where success would be measured not in applause or sales figures, but in whether she could bring a moment of pure joy to a mother's final days and give her son a memory that would carry him through the difficult years ahead. What Reba didn't know was that 600 miles away, Logan was experiencing his own moment of reckoning. Dr. Peterson had called him into the hallway outside his mother's room, and the conversation that followed would test the strength that his mother had spent 9 years building in him. "Logan, I need you to understand that your mother's condition has changed rapidly. The new medication isn't working the way we hoped. We think it might be time to call your Aunt Jennifer." Logan nodded solemnly, the weight of adult responsibilities settling on his small shoulders. But inside his heart, he held on to a secret hope that even the doctors couldn't take away. Somewhere out there, his letter was traveling through a system he didn't understand, toward a woman who had never met his mother, but whose voice had been their constant companion through every struggle they had ever faced. He didn't know that his impossible wish was about to become reality, that sometimes the universe conspires to make miracles out of the most ordinary materials. A letter, a song, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and son. The next morning arrived with an unseasonable clarity, as if the storm that had battered Oklahoma for days had finally exhausted itself, leaving behind skies so blue they seemed almost artificial. Logan woke early in the uncomfortable hospital chair that had become his bed, his neck stiff from sleeping in an awkward position beside his mother's bed. Sarah was still sleeping, her breathing shallow but steady, and for a moment Logan allowed himself to pretend that this was just another ordinary morning in their extraordinary circumstances. But ordinary mornings didn't include Dr. Peterson arriving before sunrise with the kind of expression that made Logan's stomach drop to his shoes. The doctor's usual gentle demeanor was tinged with something Logan had learned to recognize over the past 3 months, the careful preparation that adults used when they were about to deliver news that would change everything. "Logan, could I speak with you and your Aunt Jennifer for a moment?" Aunt Jennifer had arrived the night before, driving straight through from Little Rock after Dr. Peterson's call. She was his mother's younger sister, a high school math teacher with kind eyes and steady hands, who had always been the practical one in the family. Logan had spent summers at her house, learning to ride bikes and catch fireflies, while his mother worked extra shifts to save money. Jennifer represented stability, routine, and all the things his life was about to lose forever. The conversation took place in a small family consultation room that Logan had learned to hate over the past weeks. It was painted a cheerful yellow that was supposed to be soothing, but instead felt aggressively optimistic in the face of tragedy. Dr. Peterson's words washed over him like water. Comfort care, making her as peaceful as possible, probably days rather than weeks. "Logan, do you understand what Dr. Peterson is telling us?" Aunt Jennifer's voice was gentle but firm, treating him with the respect that adults usually reserved for other adults. Logan nodded because words felt too heavy for his throat. He understood perfectly. His mother was dying, and all the hoping in the world wouldn't change that fact. The letter he had sent to Reba McEntire suddenly felt foolish, a child's desperate grasp at magic in a world governed by harsh medical realities. But 300 miles away, magic was indeed stirring in the most unlikely of forms. Reba McEntire sat in the passenger seat of Marcus's rental car, watching the Oklahoma landscape roll past the windows as they drove northeast toward Tulsa. She had insisted on making the drive rather than flying, needing the time to process what she was about to do and to prepare mentally for what would undoubtedly be one of the most emotionally challenging performances of her career. "You know this is crazy, right?" Marcus said for the 3rd time since they had left Oklahoma City. "We've never done anything like this before." "That doesn't mean it's wrong," Reba replied, adjusting the guitar case in her lap. She had brought her oldest acoustic guitar, a Martin D28, that had been with her since her earliest recording sessions. If she was going to sing for a dying woman and her son, she wanted to bring the instrument that had been present for some of her most authentic musical moments. Marcus glanced at his phone, checking messages from the record label executives who were trying to understand why their biggest star had suddenly disappeared from Los Angeles. "The studio is not happy about the postponed session, and your publicist is fielding calls about why you missed the photo shoot for Country Living magazine. They'll survive," Reba said simply. "Sarah Mitchell won't." The weight of that statement settled between them as they continued driving through small Oklahoma towns that reminded Reba of her own childhood. She thought about the early days of her career when she had performed in tiny venues for audiences of 20 or 30 people, each person's face visible from the stage. Fame had brought many gifts, but it had also created distance between her and the intimate connections that had first drawn her to music. Today felt like a return to something essential, something she had lost somewhere between sold-out arenas and platinum albums. Today, she would sing for an audience of 2, in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and sadness, and it might be the most important performance of her entire career. At Tulsa General Hospital, the afternoon shift was changing over when an unusual commotion arose at the front desk. Nurse Patricia Collins, who had been working the reception area for 12 years, looked up from her computer to see a woman in jeans and a simple blue shirt approaching with a guitar case and a nervous-looking man in an expensive suit. There was something familiar about the woman's face, something that made Patricia do a double-take before recognition hit her like a lightning bolt. She had been listening to Reba McEntire's music since she was a teenager, had attended 2 of her concerts over the years, and had all of her albums. But seeing the country music legend standing in her hospital lobby, guitar in hand, felt surreal beyond comprehension. "Excuse me," Reba said, her voice carrying that distinctive warmth that had made her famous. "I'm looking for Sarah Mitchell's room. I believe she has a son named Logan." Patricia's mouth opened and closed silently for a moment before professional training kicked in. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I can't give out patient room information unless you're family." Marcus stepped forward, beginning to explain about verified identity and celebrity protocols, but Reba gently placed a hand on his arm to stop him. She leaned across the counter, speaking directly to Patricia with the kind of genuine connection that had always been her trademark. "Patricia," she said, reading the name tag, "I received a letter from Logan Mitchell. His mother is dying, and he asked if I might consider visiting her. I've driven here from Los Angeles because I believe that when a child asks for something that simple and that important, we should try to make it happen." Patricia stared at the woman in front of her, trying to process the impossibility of the situation. Country music's biggest star was standing in her hospital, asking to visit Sarah Mitchell, the nurse from the oncology ward who had been fighting cancer for months while everyone whispered about how brave she was, how unfair it all seemed. "You're really her," Patricia whispered. "You're really Reba McEntire." "Yes, ma'am, I am. And I'm really here to see Sarah if that's possible." The hospital had protocols, procedures, regulations about visitor access and patient privacy. But Patricia Collins had been working in healthcare long enough to understand that sometimes the most healing thing she could do had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with recognizing when the impossible was trying to become possible. "Room 214, she said quietly. "But ma'am, you should know that she's been unconscious for most of the past 2 days. The little boy has barely left her side." Reba nodded, feeling her throat tighten with emotion she hadn't expected. "That's exactly why I need to be here." As they walked through the hospital corridors, Marcus couldn't help but notice the stares and whispers that followed them. Staff members were pulling out phones, patients in wheelchairs were doing double takes, and the normal rhythm of the hospital seemed to slow as word spread that something extraordinary was happening. "Are you ready for this?" Marcus asked as they approached room 214. Reba paused outside the door, listening to the soft beeping of medical equipment and the quiet murmur of voices inside. Through the small window, she could see Logan sitting beside his mother's bed, holding her hand and speaking to her in the earnest way that children do when they're trying to will their words into magic. "No," she said honestly, "but I don't think anyone could ever be ready for this." She knocked gently on the doorframe and stepped into the room, guitar case in hand. Logan looked up from his mother's bedside, and his face went through a series of expressions that Reba would remember for the rest of her life: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, pure wonder. "Logan," she said softly, "I'm Reba. I got your letter." The boy's eyes filled with tears as he looked from Reba to his unconscious mother and back again. "So you came," he whispered, as if he couldn't quite believe the evidence of his own eyes. "You really came." "Of course I came, honey. Your letter told me that your mama needed some music, and I never could turn down a request like that." What happened next would become a moment that everyone in that room would carry with them forever, a reminder that sometimes the most profound miracles come wrapped in the simplest packages: a song, a presence, and the unwavering belief that love can transcend any distance. Reba set her guitar case gently on the floor and approached Sarah's bedside with the reverence one might show in a sacred space. Even unconscious, Sarah Mitchell possessed a dignity that spoke of strength worn down by circumstance rather than character. Her face, though gaunt from months of treatment, still held traces of the beauty that Logan had inherited, and her hands, clasped peacefully on the hospital blanket, bore the calluses of someone who had worked hard her entire life. "She's beautiful," Reba said softly, and Logan's face brightened with pride despite his tears. "She really loves you," Logan whispered, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the fragile peace of the room. "She knows all your songs, even the really old ones from before I was born." Reba pulled a chair close to the bed, positioning herself where Sarah would be able to see her if she woke. "Tell me about her, Logan. What's her favorite song?" "You're Gonna Be," Logan answered without hesitation. She used to sing it to me when I had bad dreams. She said it reminded her that I was going to be okay, even when things were scary. The irony wasn't lost on Reba, a song about a mother's love for her child, now requested by a child trying to love his dying mother through her final moments. She opened her guitar case and lifted out the Martin D28, its wood worn smooth by decades of performances, its sound seasoned by countless songs and stories. As she began to tune the guitar, something extraordinary happened. Sarah's eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. Her gaze was unfocused at first, confused by the medication and the strange voices in her room. But as her eyes found Logan's face, then traveled to the woman sitting beside her bed with a guitar, Sarah's expression shifted from confusion to wonder. "Logan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Am I dreaming?" "No, Mama," Logan said, gripping her hand tighter. "She's really here. Reba McEntire is really here, and she's going to sing for you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Reba, trying to process the impossibility of the moment. "How?" she managed to ask. "Your son wrote me a letter," Reba explained gently. "He told me about a mama who loved music and needed some songs. I couldn't think of anywhere I'd rather be." With infinite care, Reba began to play the opening chords of "You're Gonna Be," but instead of the recorded version that Sarah knew by heart, this was something more intimate, more personal. Reba's voice, unmiked and unproduced, filled the small hospital room with warmth that seemed to push back against the clinical coldness of the medical equipment. As she sang about a young mother's love, her hopes and fears for her child's future, Sarah's lips began to move along with the familiar words. Logan watched in amazement as his mother, who hadn't spoken more than a few words in days, found the strength to sing along with her idol. "He's gonna have your eyes and my stubborn streak," they sang together, Reba adjusting her tempo to match Sarah's weaker voice. "Lord help us all, he's gonna think he's smarter than me." The song took on new meaning in that hospital room. It wasn't just about a mother's love anymore. It was about the legacy that love leaves behind, about the way a parent's strength lives on in their child long after they're gone. When the last note faded, the room was quiet except for the sound of quiet crying from everyone present, including Marcus, who stood in the doorway wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, her voice stronger now than it had been in days. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for raising such a remarkable son," Reba replied. "Logan's letter told me everything I needed to know about the kind of mother you are." They talked for nearly an hour, Sarah sharing stories about Logan's childhood while he sat between them, listening to his mother speak with more energy than she'd had in weeks. Reba told them about her own son, about the challenges of balancing career and motherhood, about how music had carried her through her own difficult times. As the afternoon light began to fade through the hospital room window, Sarah's strength started to wane. But before exhaustion could claim her again, she looked at Logan with eyes that held all the love she had spent 9 years pouring into him. "Baby," she said, "I need you to remember something for me." Logan leaned closer, ready to receive whatever final wisdom his mother wanted to share. "You are going to be okay, not just okay, but wonderful. You have music in your heart, just like we always knew. And whenever you feel scared or alone, you remember that love doesn't end just because someone goes away. It lives on in all the songs we sang together, in all the dreams I have for you." Reba watched this exchange with the understanding that she was witnessing something sacred, a mother passing on her strength to her child in the most profound way possible. Without being asked, she began to play again, this time choosing "The Greatest Man I Never Knew," the song Logan had mentioned in his letter. Sarah closed her eyes and smiled as Reba sang about regret and lost opportunities, but in the context of that hospital room, the song became about appreciation, about recognizing love while it's still present. When Reba reached the line about running out of time to tell someone how much they matter, Sarah opened her eyes and looked directly at Logan. "I love you, baby boy, more than all the stars in the sky, more than all the songs ever written. That will never, ever change." 3 days later, Sarah Mitchell passed away peacefully in her sleep, with Logan holding one hand and Reba, who had stayed in Oklahoma despite her obligations, holding the other. The funeral service was held at a small church in Broken Arrow, where Reba sang "Amazing Grace" a cappella, her voice carrying across a congregation of nurses, teachers, neighbors, and friends who had come to pay their respects to a woman who had touched more lives than she ever knew. But the story didn't end with Sarah's death. 2 weeks later, Logan received a package that would change the trajectory of his entire life. Inside was an acoustic guitar, not an expensive one, but a good starter instrument, along with a letter written in Reba's careful handwriting. "Dear Logan," it read, "your mama was right about you having music in your heart. If you'd like to learn to play, I've arranged for lessons with a teacher in Tulsa, and whenever you're ready, there will always be a place for you on one of my stages. Your mama's love lives on in you, and I promise to help you share that love with the world through music. You're going to be just fine, sweet boy. Love, Reba." Logan kept that letter beside his bed every night, and within 6 months, he was playing simple melodies on the guitar Reba had sent. Within 2 years, he was writing his own songs. By the time he turned 16, he had opened 3 shows for Reba McEntire, performing songs he had written about his mother, about loss, about the power of kindness from strangers who become family. The letter that had started it all, written in blue ink on notebook paper by a desperate 9-year-old boy, was framed and hung in Reba's home office. Sometimes, when the demands of celebrity felt overwhelming, when the business side of music threatened to eclipse the joy of creating, she would look at Logan's words and remember why she had fallen in love with singing in the first place. Years later, when interviewers asked Reba about the most meaningful moment of her career, she never hesitated with her answer. Not the Grammy wins, not the sold-out stadium shows, not the million-selling albums. It was an afternoon in a hospital room in Oklahoma, singing for an audience of 2, being reminded that music's greatest power isn't in entertaining thousands, but in comforting one heart at a time. Logan grew up to become a successful singer-songwriter, carrying his mother's strength and Reba's mentorship into a career that touched countless lives. He never performed without dedicating at least one song to Sarah Mitchell, the nurse who taught him that love is the most powerful force in the universe, and to Reba McEntire, the stranger who proved that kindness can create miracles. The story of how a simple letter connected 3 lives across the miles between Oklahoma and Nashville became legend in country music circles. A reminder that sometimes the most important thing an artist can do is remember that behind every song request, every fan letter, every desperate hope, there's a human heart that needs to be heard.